Hello, hello, hello. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. We are live. My name is Sam, Live Production Tips and Tools. I hope everyone is doing well. Today, I have to apologize first. We had a little hiccup because of time differences. We are a little late. I'm assuming about 10 minutes late, but we are here. And today we're gonna be talking about Sony cameras. We have a special guest, but before I introduce the guest, I'm actually gonna go through your comments. We got Victor in the house. Thank you, man. Thank you for joining today. We got Adam. Thank you from Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining. We got Devin. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Adam. Of course, we got our guest, and we got Devin tuning in from Kampala. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Again, happy Valentine's Day. I'm not gonna take much time because today I have the one and only Diana Gladney in the house. I'm not going to introduce her. I'm gonna let her introduce herself. Let's actually, Diana, how you doing this morning?
I am doing fantastic. I'm so pumped to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you so much. I just have to confess, I'm a big fan of your channel. I have subscribed ever since I started doing YouTube, and this is a great honor actually to have you on the channel. Guys, let me know in the chat if the audio is good, if you can hear me and hear Diana. But Diana, I didn't want to introduce you actually. Could you, especially, I know some of my audience actually, most of them are subscribed to your channel, but for the people who don't know about you, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Who are you? What do you do?
For sure. So my name is Diana Gladney. I'm a native out of St. Louis, Missouri in the U.S. And man, I got started in video just honestly kicking and screaming. So it wasn't something where, honestly, people think you're always, in front of the camera maybe or very outgoing. And that just wasn't the case for me. So a little bit about myself is I'm the youngest of six, an aunt to many, and now even a great aunt. And so I started, I think, lot like many other people where you're thinking and you have this idea of something that you want to do. And for me, that was just like knowing that I wanted to eventually leave my corporate job. And so you kind of have those ideas, but you kind of put it on the back burner and you think, well, maybe, in X amount of years or when I reach certain, age point or what have you. And for me, that wasn't the case. I ended up getting really sick, having emergency surgery that completely and utterly changed my life. When I came back to work, literally after being out for a month, it completely, change the perspective of time because when that time is almost taken from you, now you look at it as a gift instead of it like something that you can delay and, schedule according to when you feel like it. And from there on, I started doing like many people do, going to YouTube, searching for a bunch of questions, and it led me to my first coach and eventually led me into video. So that's just a little bit about me, if you will. Pretty much, I think my story is pretty much like everybody else's, except that, those moments you can honestly, I guess, I guess you would say you just take action. That's the only thing. You just take one little step after another little step. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, what a story. Those are the moments where you feel like I gotta do what I'm meant to do.
Mm.
I'm sure that other people can actually relate to your story. But let's talk about your YouTube channel before actually we get to the actual content of the day. Just about your YouTube channel, again, personally, I'm a big fan of YouTube channel. I watch almost all of your videos.
And thank you.
But can you tell us a little bit how you got started, and what you're doing right now? Who are you trying to help with your YouTube channel?
Yeah, for sure. So my YouTube channel is all about helping busy entrepreneurs simplify the video creation process. And so how I got started with YouTube was honestly was at the request, if you will, of my business coach, who would told me basically that if I wanted to have a business, I had to be online. There was no other way. You had to be visible, and he was very adamant about it can't just be photo based posts. It can't just be text based posts. While those are great, those are powerful, even like audio only, is that you have to do video. And so my introduction into YouTube got to me trying to figure out how to make my videos look better. It's like you see great looking videos on YouTube, and like he had this video challenge. And so everybody's posting, and it's like, the ones that are coming like from a smartphone, but you also know like what your stuff is looking like. And I felt like mine was at the bottom of the barrel. And so I was just trying to figure out how to be better. And so that led me to searching on YouTube. Well, unfortunately, the landscape of like the tech industry, cameras and things like we'll talk about today was not there, and it wasn't present in the way that I teach it. And it's definitely not. It wasn't a creator focused community. You had photography or videography or cinematography. I wasn't trying to fit either of those camps. I was trying to create content for my business, and so nobody's really talking about that from that scope. So the way I got started into where my channel led me into today was just literally trying to solve my own problems. And so I became the coach to the person that wouldn't have one when it came to getting visible using video. So that's what my channel is all about, helping entrepreneurs navigate this video content creation space to make these concepts that are coming from the cinematography and the photography niches simplified in the way that you can just get to work and get back to the reason why you create your company or what you're wanting to create content around, and just be more productive in doing that. So that's what our channel is about today, and like all those different things.
All right, thank you so much. Just to let you know, guys, I have linked Diana's channel in the description. You can go ahead and check out her channel. She has amazing content. So guys, we're gonna go straight to the content, and eventually about 30 minutes in, we're gonna start answering your questions. So make sure you drop all the questions in the comment section. Let me know where you're watching from. And obviously, Diana, I've seen you actually you have been covering so many Sony cameras. And today we actually we're gonna talk about the best budget Sony cameras. My audience, most of them are creators, but I do have actually a lot of people who come from church church background, and most of them want to know which Sony camera they can buy. Most of them actually, I'm not gonna say they're on the budget, but who
Yeah.
doesn't want to save money? You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So yeah, exactly. So we're gonna be talking about budget Sony cameras for mostly live streaming and video recording. So I'm not gonna take much time. Let's actually go straight to the first question, which is what should you look for when trying to choose or buy a camera for live streaming and video recording?
That's a fantastic question. So my recommendations are always going to be need based. So what do you actually need? You're always going to see what's highly recommended, what's trending. But when it comes to you picking a camera and what it should include, you really want to think about what kind of content that you're going to create and get past that first layer thinking of, I'm going to make YouTube videos, or I'm going to make videos for social media. Fantastic. Or you say, I'm going to make them for my church, or I'm going to make them for my company. Great. Now, what kind of videos would that be? This could be the vlogging style content. Like you said, this could be the live streaming content, or this could be the regular videos, but it's in mostly indoors in the office, could be in a church or what have you. Once you can narrow down, like, okay, well, we're going to do a show where our live streams may go out over an hour, or our videos may go into 20-minute trainings, sometimes 30 or 40-minute trainings, where it's just continuous. Or it could be a Bible study training or something like that, where you know that these are extending into longer periods of time. So the things that you want to look for in a camera is making sure that they meet those basic needs, because if you start by only going off of what's highly recommended, you are most of the time going to make a purchase that initially makes you feel good until you start to try to create content and you run into problems because you bought just only based off of that instead of going off of your needs. So that's what I always say is make a list of your non-negotiables. What are the things that we absolutely have to make things easy for us? So it needs to have clean HDMI. I believe it needs to have stellar autofocus, which means you should be able to sit in front of your camera, not have to worry about twisting the lens to manually adjust so it's on your face and nothing else. All cameras will have that anyway, but it needs to have really great autofocus. So when it comes time for you to do your content, and this also is getting into just being able to crank out content faster, you need to be able to sit down, record, or live stream in an instant if you have to or want to, so that you can be able to move at the speed of your ideas. So that's another thing. I don't worry so much so about battery life. There's always a way to navigate that. There are other efficiencies in cameras that I think are good to look for now, which are things like internal internal USB charging. And so that same thing like your phone, that's internal USB charging. So that same kind of capacity, it should have that. And it absolutely should have a microphone input port, which is that 3.5 millimeter connection. So that the same way like we would plug in our headphones into anything, your camera should have that so you can connect a microphone source. Next level, I think, if depending on the kind of content that you're making, would be having a headphone port. Not all cameras may have that. And so that may list over into the I would like it to have category versus the microphone port is a must have category. So those are those basic needs when it comes to that. And I would add on one additional thing, which is have good lens options. And then a plus one to that would be have a good upgrade path. This camera is going to get you to a point of your ideas or your content or whatever, and that camera should be making you money. I don't care what the organization is, even if it's a nonprofit, it still should be generating income and solving problems for you, which is why I'm big on not investing in something that is so cheap that it's going to introduce more problems and make it harder for you to create. So those are those baseline features that I think everybody needs to be looking for in a baseline camera, at least at this point.
Thank you so much. Let's go. I want to talk about autofocus. Most of content creators do need autofocus. I do need autofocus. I use Panasonic. I have to confess. I use Panasonic cameras. And if you know, this is my GH5. If you know,
Stellar
one of the
camera.
problems, one of the problems that you going to encounter with these cameras is the poor autofocus, right? So like even right now I have to tweak my background, to make sure, the way it's going to, the AI works to be able to to provide a good autofocus is so complicated and it's so hard to deal with. But when it comes to creating content, I have to admit when I started, I was actually, when I started out on YouTube, I was using manual focus. And it was so hard because, if you want to have a nice depth of field, blurry background, when you move out of focus, you have to manually adjust the focus again. It's so hard when you're creating content. But when it comes to, let's say, non-for-profit like churches, do we really need to have autofocus? You think it's something, because I see most people, who have some people kind of operating on cameras. So do we really need to have autofocus when we are in church environment or creating content for big events?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's not just and that's the thing, it's not just a YouTube kind of a thing. And fun fact, my second camera after Canon cameras was the Panasonic, after Canon cameras, the Panasonic J85. And then I had the Panasonic G7. I love really a lot of the brands that are out there. They are good for different things. But I absolutely believe that a nonprofit organization, especially a church, must have good autofocus, even if you have a camera operator, because it's guaranteed that not everything is always going to be sunny or things are going to be great, or you have where you have a surplus of people in any one position. If you only have one camera operator, two is one and one is none. If that one person calls off and you need to fill that in with somebody that isn't that familiar, maybe they are a little bit trained, but not fully trained, like they don't get it to the depth of somebody that loves it is doing it, then great. But two is one and one is none. So unless you have backups upon backups upon backups, which most nonprofit organizations, I think here in the US, they're looking at churches, the average church is 200 members or less. And so that means they mostly are always fighting, trying to get people involved in the church. You may have a mass congregation, or even if you have like 50, 70, 100 people there, you don't have where you have a steady flow of people that are constantly coming to work in the church. And then number two, competent workers that can come work in the church. But what you can have is great autofocus in the camera that lifts some of that heavy lifting. So if you need to replace that person or do something else, or bring in and start training more volunteers, that is one thing to where the footage will not get messed up and they can start focus on panning, because I'm sure you've had or seen those footages where somebody is new and they're manning the camera and they whip it too far to the left. They completely leave pastor behind and we're looking at the person on piano on accident. So they got to bring it back. So there's more to it than just, managing like, oh, because of this brand. It's not really like a brand loyalty thing, but I started honestly all of this so that I could help in my local church. And that was the thing. You don't know enough of what all is required, or you're trying to do different things or needing to move faster. And again, the camera needs to be able to keep up with the ideas that you have. So autofocus is a necessity.
Awesome. So I'm gonna get you actually to name some of the cameras in a moment. But before we actually get to that part, can we talk about the sensor size? Is it that important?
I think a lot of people would like that answer to be yes. And my honest answer is not really, because there are so many things. Like, you have to learn video regardless. And the video principles are applicable to any sensor size, whether that be micro four thirds or a 1 inch sensor, like in some of the point and shoot cameras, or if you're looking at something like APS-C, which is some of the Sony cameras like A6400 and so on, or the full frame cameras that like the A7 III by Sony was something that's really popular. Well, if you don't know anything about video regardless, or you don't understand like things like the exposure triangle, you don't understand how to properly adjust your lighting and things like that, it doesn't matter what sensor size you use, it's going to look terrible regardless. And so when you know the basic video principles, and then even a little bit above that, you can operate on any sensor size competently, because you know what things to adjust for. So when I used to shoot micro four thirds, what would be like an ISO 300 or something like that, or maybe 250 on an APS-C camera, then at that point you may be looking in the 6 to 800 range for the ISO. Somebody that's not familiar with that space, that just means you're trying to adjust for the light sensitivity. Well, if you understand the concepts about video, you need to understand, if I'm shooting micro four thirds, I need to really be careful of making sure I'm dealing with well-lit situations to accommodate for the sensor size. I like to start a lot of people off at APS-C, just because I like to explain it like French fries at a drive-through, which is you got the small, the medium, and the large. Micro four thirds is the small, APS-C is the medium, and then full frame is like, your large drinks and things like that. So
Yeah.
medium is usually a good place, I think, to start.
Awesome. So basically what you're saying is the sensor size doesn't matter. You just gotta know what you're working with and how to deal with it.
For sure. But it's like, the thing is though, don't start like I very am rarely going to recommend micro four thirds to somebody, even when I was using a ton of micro four thirds cameras, because I think if you're going to go into full frame, or if you're going to go into micro four thirds, both of those are fantastic systems, but know why you want to go that route. Most people think, well, I'm just going to go full frame because I get a blurry background. Can you really? It's like, if you're looking at, apertures and things a little bit more complex, which you can dive into maybe later. It's like, honestly, it's like you can achieve the same look across any cameras if you have the right lens and if you know what you're doing. So it's like, you can't just buy it just for the hoopla of what you see on YouTube or whatever. Like, you need to know why you're going one way or the other.
Yep, I agree 100%. So let's talk about some of the Sony cameras. I've used some, and personally, I've had some overheating issues. Can we talk about that?
Sure. Which cameras have you tried?
Well, A6400.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had some overheating issues, but never had it for a long time. So basically, I returned it. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, if you are having overheating issues, it's like, one, is it that the sensitivity on that is too low, or it's like truly having overheating. Can honestly say I have run my camera consistently, especially like in 2020, doing a lot of live talks and things like that, nonstop for 16 hours plus with the AC powered adapter going in 4K and never had a problem with it. So I would think it's just more or less that sensor icon is coming on versus actually having overheating on the camera, in my experience. But as far as overheating, I've not honestly ran into that. Can you actually overheat a camera? Sure, anything with a temperature gauge. If a human being will overheat, a piece of equipment that a human made will overheat. So it's just like certain situations, yeah, you need to have the right gear depending on what you're trying to do. But stuff like this, live streaming, video content creation, I've used a ton of cameras from, like I said, Panasonic, Canon, Sony. It's like I've not had that problem with any of these cameras. So it just more or less, especially for the Sonys, if the sensitivity is still set too low, that's all it is. You switch one setting in the camera, and then that doesn't show up anymore, like almost ever.
Yeah, maybe because personally I want to try actually Sony cameras. I'm trying to switch from micro four third to full frame, and I'm thinking of actually Sony.
Mhm.
And but also I'm trying to ask for actually people who may be following and trying to probably get into Sony cameras.
Yeah.
It's not just me. I've heard a lot of people actually complaining about the overheating problem. It's not
Mhm.
just Sony. Some of the Canon cameras as well.
Mhm.
Um, but I think back in the day I tried, was it the A7S3? Well, I cannot confirm, but it used to get this battery icon kind of and would display a message saying battery exhausted and then will
Oh yeah,
shut
it's the
down.
terrible battery life. Yeah, now, like
Yeah.
that. Like so, for one, so just to be like, there are cameras that will have overheating. Like when the Canon R5 came out, that camera was notorious for overheating. People trying to find all kind of that. Like I watched the progress of that, and they're trying to do firmware upgrades and all this other stuff to fix it. And it's like there are cameras that really have that problem. Sony was notorious for this with their A6300 and 6500 back in the day. So, there are those cameras that exist that do have them. Even with the Sony A7 IV, there were people complaining about that as well. But the thing is, like, if you're going to, invest in a camera or what have you, then that's some things to know, like, what are the limitations? So if the like 7S, if it was like the original one, or A7S2 or something like that, with the FW50 batteries, the little batteries, you definitely will get very familiar with that battery exhausted symbol, which is basically you only have about 2 hours if you're recording in like 1080p or 4K, where you're going to be able to like use that battery consistently, and then you need to swap it out. But for me, honestly, my exchange with like the system, like again, I don't want to carry a big camera. So that's the thing with me. The weight of my overall equipment cannot be a burden to me. Otherwise, I'm not going to want to carry it. So I don't mind using that. So I've been using recently like the Sony ZV-E10. Like I said, I know you want to get into the models a little later, but I've been using this and it has that battery. I don't ever need to carry more than one other battery, just with the way that I cycle and use my system. No different than I use my smartphone. Like we used to, if you remember, like carry a bunch of smartphone batteries or whatever in the bags and stuff like that for older smartphones. Or they weren't smartphones. I guess they would be dumb phones, but it's like we used to have to carry batteries for our phones and stuff. So yeah, so no, I just, you can charge your camera internally. There's other options. So
Perfect. Yeah, actually, let's get to the meat. Actually, let's talk about some of the best. I think we're gonna divide them into two parts. The first
okay.
part is gonna be some of the best Sony cameras for under $1,000. So
Mhm.
under $1,000 for me is like really low budget, I would say. That will still perform well, will give you the nice blurry background. You can use them for creating content for social media, YouTube, whatever you're doing. And you could still use the same cameras for if you're doing some church live streaming or recording videos and stuff like that, with great autofocus, obviously, because this is Sony we're talking about. So do you have some examples that you could actually recommend?
Yeah, for sure. So if you're looking for under $1,000, that's going to put you into the category of a couple APS-C cameras. That's mostly where that range is going to fit. So you would look at if you can find any used cameras for the Sony A6100. Now that camera only has the basic profiles on there, so you're not going to get into color grading or anything like that. You do get stellar autofocus and unlimited recording. You do have the smaller batteries that we talked about. So that's something to contend with. But this camera that I'm shooting on now would be the next one that also uses that, which is the Sony A6400 that does have those log profiles. It will allow you to start getting into the realm of color grading and things like that. But the way that I've always dealt with it when I know I'm going to do long-term recording is one or two things. Either I have it attached to a battery bank, and then for as long as I have juice in that battery bank, I have power to my camera, or I'm using, like here, a wired solution, which is going straight into the wall. So I'm using an AC power adapter. Next up is going to be, honestly, around about that same price range is the Sony ZV-E10 that came out in October of 2021. And this is the camera that I was just messing around with here a second ago. And so this camera has a lot of the things that some of the other ones don't, which is a lot of specs as far as 4K, 30 frames per second, eye autofocus. You're also going to get face detection and animal eye autofocus as well, whether you're in like photos or video. And then also you're looking into unlimited recording, the internal battery charging. It has the microphone and the headphone port. The A6100, A6400, it doesn't have that. So you have that kind of stuff to contend with. And then lastly, if you can find this camera used, would be something like the Sony A6600. Has internal stabilization on the sensor instead of digital, like the ZV-E10 does. But the other two that I mentioned, A61 and 6400, does not have internal stabilization at all. So unless you're using a gimbal or you're using autofocus that is in the lens, not autofocus, but stabilization in the lens, that OSS, which stands for optical steady stabilization, then at that point you have some stabilization in the lens, but not a ton. But those are more or less like tripod cameras, or you're going to fly those on the gimbal. ZV-E10 has digital stabilization. You may still want to use a gimbal if you're doing certain functions. And then the A6600, like I said, if you could find that used, you may be able to get that under $1,000 as well, and that's US pricing. And that has internal stabilization on the sensor, a headphone port, and some other things, and a much bigger battery.
Wow. So all those cameras are APS-C sensor, right? Correct.
Yep.
Perfect. So let's talk about maybe they don't have to be full frame, but if we go above $1,000, what are we talking about?
If we're going over $1,000, we're now looking for a specific thing. We're looking to get access to, like, there's an 8-bit color space and a 10-bit color space. And the way I explain this to people that don't know that much about video is like, imagine like the packs of like 8 or 64 crayons, like when we were kids, versus the really big carton of, like, I don't know, like 200 crayons things with the crayon sharpener in the back, like we had growing up. So it's the different, like 8-bit color space and 10-bit color space. It's like having access to 8 to 24 or 64 crayons versus 200 crayons to color with. You have way more depth in the color, way more options to maneuver and push those colors with. So those are things like that you'll see when people say it's like 10-bit, 422. You'll hear those numbers in videos on YouTube, but you don't really understand what that means. But if you remember the crayon analogy, then it starts to make more sense. When you have more colors to color with, you have more scope of range of being able to maneuver and manipulate to get a specific stylized look. A lot of nonprofits and churches really take a look at some of the major organizations, major churches like Elevation Church, or for Stephen Furtick, or you're looking at like TD Jakes and just other ministries, and you'll see, man, I wish we had our stuff like that. Or you look at a church homepage and you see like those people smiling, giving high fives, and like the little demo reel to say, hey, come visit us. And you're like, man, I wish we could do something like that. Well, if you're wanting to get more into a cinema-esque kind of a space, now we need to play in that arena. You're looking at much better stabilization. You are probably looking into more of a full frame sensor size, not always, but most of the time that's usually that. Like I said, the 10-bit color space. Obviously, you're going to get a headphone port, much bigger battery, way better battery life. In addition to a ton of other things that really are more so when you're really trying to learn more about videography.
Awesome. Do you have some cameras that you can name?
Yeah, for sure. So at a very basic level, you're going to be looking at the recent Sony A7 IV that just recently came out. It has some really neat stuff in there to help you. So we talked a little bit about the woes of manual focus and like not being able, even with the peaking, where you get the colored dots over your face to be able to know when something's in focus or not. Well, they have like this color mapping to be able to say what parts of the image is in focus versus others. Very interesting and crazy. Or like focus breathing. This is a little bit more advanced stuff, but when you zoom a lens in and out and you see it kind of condense in and out and kind of breathe a little bit, that's corrected. So they have all these different little settings and things in there that honestly isn't in some of their higher end cameras. So that's the kind of stuff that you're looking at. But that Sony A7 IV is a very, very good baseline recommendation there. Then you're looking at the Sony A7S Mark III. Now we're starting to get into like $3,500 price
Yeah.
range, or the Sony FX3, which is like a mini cinema camera, if you will, both of those. And that's like
Yeah.
4K, 120 frames per second. So very high quality, like for super slow motion, just like, I mean, really, really detailed shots and stuff like that. And then, of course, if you're just going next level, then maybe you really are starting to look into more cinema based bodies, or at least something that's kind of like a hybrid or something like the Sony A1, which I have had the pleasure of trying that camera, and it is something magical about it. But you're also looking at like a $4,500 price tag or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm actually gonna ask you a question personally because I'm a videographer. So even my GH5, when I'm using it to create content for YouTube, most of the time, let's say if I'm live streaming, I'm just using the natural profile, right? I'm not using 4K. I never live stream in 4K. Even my videos, I'm not creating any content in 4K right now. I feel like full HD is still okay. But most most people will go out and actually buy these expensive cameras with ton of features, like log profile, like cinema cameras in general.
Hmm.
And if you are into live streaming and just creating a little bit of content, some videos here and there, you're probably never gonna use those features. What do you still would you still recommend getting like these high-end cinema cameras, especially for people, let's say for churches who are going to use it mostly for live streaming, a little bit of video recording, or content creators, people creating videos on YouTube, who are not really videographers? Would you recommend those kind of cameras?
It depends on the ministry and the goals of the ministry, because I never want to encourage somebody to only buy at your current level of thinking or even at your current belief system, because that's very limiting. Just to say, well, I'm only going to use it for this. You're not giving any capacity or space for even like your God ideas or those like big ideas that just honestly don't come from you. Or you're not giving any space to have creative freedom to say, now that I've learned to do at what I'm thinking to do, now I have this idea. This is where people run into this lid of, I bought a camera that is not like bad in any way, but it's like basic enough in the feature set that I cannot perform the ideas with ease of what I'm trying to do. That's why I said I usually start people off at that APS-C size, sensor size framing, because that is enough to get you through at least the next 3 or 4 years about your idea. And more than likely, what's going to happen is you're going to invest in that. You're never going to make it to year 3 or 4 because you decide you personally want something else. You want have new ideas of other things. You want to invest in other things. It's almost always how it happens. But I do encourage churches to think about it, solely because you have a budget most of the time for a specific frame. Let's say that they have a $4,000 budget, right? So if this nonprofit, this church is working on 4 grand, they know they're not going to have this media budget forever. They're looking to obviously do something with it. And when you have people donating, those people expect to see their investments go somewhere. And then also, I don't encourage to just go at like what is right now. You do want to invest in future proofing. So I have the A6400 now. I've had this camera since 2019, and I've literally used it every day. Had I bought something that's not cheaper in the price, but like cheaper in the feature set, there's no way I would have been able to do or even be able to be afforded the opportunities to do the other things that came that I wasn't thinking to do, like invitations and offers to do things that was like, hey, can you come do this? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. Do you know how to use Sony cameras? Like, yeah, absolutely. So it's only with leaning in and investing into that I was able to do that. So I definitely would encourage, even though like, yeah, 1080p is fine right now, but we're also looking into 6K and 8K. Like if your phone can do 4K, I think that needs to become the new baseline, even if what everybody else is doing, that's fine. But when it's time to embrace those new ideas, do we now have to go back to the board and have a budget meeting about the last $4,000 wasn't invested properly? Or say, yes, we're going to maximize most of this budget. We may ask for additional donations. So we don't have to have this conversation again for another 5 years. And even then, it'll be because we may want something else that's out and that's new, that brings new things to the table, that allows us to have and embrace new ideas versus like being stuck with like, well, we'll have to wait 2 or 3 more years because we can't, like the camera and stuff we have can't do it.
All right, like that. So let's talk about lenses. Time. It looks like it's almost time to start taking questions, guys. So sorry, I'm trying to cover everything. Let's talk about lenses, lens options, especially for Sony cameras. What do you recommend? Where can somebody start from when buying from the cheapest lenses to the most expensive? What do you look for when you try to buy a lens for your cameras?
Again, I'm never going to go off of like general recommendation. I'll usually have like ones that fit most of where people are. But honestly, like the best thing that you can do when you are investing in video is get the kit lens. Any camera, any brand, get the kit lens. Because what's going to happen with having the kit lens, it may not be the sharpest. People may rag on it on the internet, but that's not the point. The point is so that you can learn the system and also find your right focal lengths. Like in your room, I'm not sure how big that may be. You may have 3 or 4 paces behind you before you run into the wall. Or it could be, a little lens deception there where it's like, no, it's actually like 7 or 8 feet behind me. Like it's quite a bit of space. It's not that much space behind me. It's a really small room. So if we're looking at what lenses should we get, use the kit lens to put that on your camera, sit the camera where you're going to sit it, and actually sit where you're like, so my desk is in its own same placement. And then I would adjust the focal length on the lens to be able to see, am I at 20 millimeters? Are we at more so 18 millimeters? Or are we at more so, sorry about that, my Alexa's going off. But are we at like 18 millimeters, 30 millimeters? Or, is this where I'm trying to shoot at more of a 50 millimeters? Now we know our right focal length for the kind of shot, the kind of framing that we want. Now I can sit and actually say, okay, I need to get a 35 millimeter lens to pull this look off, or I need to get a 16 millimeter lens or something even wider to pull this kind of a look off. Otherwise, you're just kind of buying blindly, hoping that it works. And initially, that's what I did. I bought like the 50 millimeter. Everybody talks about the nifty 50s. The nifty 50 sucked for me, not because it was a bad lens, just because it's like, I'm like, I need to put it down the hallway, shoot through the door, and it's like, can I even see me? Can the camera see me? Like, it's like, it was terrible. So it's like, you got to find your right focal length.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about the blurry background, the depth of field. I know a lot of people see it. Personally, I love it. It's so cinematic. It looks so cool. Every single church or content creator online that I'll consider pro, you're gonna see that look. How do you even get that look? Is this something people should go after?
It's a preference. I think everybody kind of wants the flashiest stuff on the market. It's like, but that's not even like getting a camera or anything like that. It's more so the lens. And that's where I made this mistake. It was like the dumbest thing after I learned it. I literally traded in a camera and bought a whole new camera thinking, well, this one's going to have the blurry background. It's like, no, it's a lens thing. It's not a camera body thing. So you have to have where it says like the f-stop, or if people are looking at their cameras, you'll see like an F number on the front. That number needs to be 2.0 or lower. Now you'll hear like 2.8 and people talk about blurry backgrounds. It's more like full frame, but a good rule of thumb is if you see F 2.0 on the front of that lens or lower, that means that you can sit that camera in front of you and it will give you a blurry background. The focal range is how far you can be or how close you can be to the camera. That f-stop is going to be how blurry the background could be. The lower this number, the blurrier the background. Is it needed? Nah, but do you want it? Probably. So, like it's a ton of lenses now that'll do that for you at very nice user friendly prices. But it's a couple caveats. If you go too cheap, I had one lens that sounded like a chipmunk was in it, just constantly focusing that the motors weren't quiet. So that's some of the things that you'll see with higher tier lens prices. Not that they have to be like $1,000, but if you're looking at like a lens that's between $300, $500, even $800, it's like the reason why is because it's going to focus quickly. It's going to maintain the focus. It won't do a bunch of pulsing and trying to keep reacquiring focus. So lenses can be very problematic if you're not getting the right stuff. But there's a lot of good brands like Viltrox, Tamron, Sigma that make a good one. A lot of people love the Sigma 16, and thankfully, that's on Micro Four Thirds. That is on the Fuji sensor cameras. Not Fuji sensor, but the Fuji brand cameras. It's on the Canon EF-M mount, so the like M50, Canon M6 Mark II, and it's also for the Sony E mount, which will fit any of the Sony cameras.
Awesome, awesome. Looks like we have so many questions. So before we get to the questions, probably let's talk about low light and how important is it when choosing the camera and the lens.
So low light is mostly like for what most people are talking about is usually a darker indoor situation. A camera that's good in low light is honestly irrelevant in like 99% of the scenarios that most people that think when they're new and searching that. It really is honestly irrelevant, because if you have a lens that can go f2.0 or lower, that means it's kind of like having a fist over your eye. If I'm at a kit lens, it's kind of like this. It's not going to allow as much light, but the lens that I have is at an f1.8, so it's much more open. So if my eyeball is the center of the camera, it can see much better. So it's not just giving me a blurry background, it's allowing more light to come in on the sensor. But what most people need, even in lower lit situations, is still lighting. The best films with the darkest scenes, regardless if the camera was great or not in low light, they still had to light the scene. So that's one of the things. Like, I don't think, honestly, so much so there's as much importance on having a camera that's good in low light, because regardless, you should have lighting in your scenarios from Micro Four Thirds, APS-C, or full frame.
All right, yeah. So which means you always have good. You always need to have good lighting, and obviously having a good lens with a lower aperture number is going to help with low light situations as well. So that could be something to consider. Perfect. So let's go to actually to the questions. Let me see what we have here. Let's see. Can you see the questions? Are you able to see them
on the screen? Yes.
Okay, perfect. We get my man Russell is in the house. This is my friend Russell. He has a question for you. Yeah, go ahead. I think you can read them.
Yeah, for sure. Asking who's your coach, Scott McKenna. No, but I actually like Scott McKenna's work a lot, and I've been following for some years now. So my coach was not honestly anybody that had anything to do with anything in the video or YouTube space. He was a consulting coach, and so he would teach you on how to honestly do sales. And so it had nothing to do with YouTube, but he understood the value of video. And so he was able to teach me the very basics. My very first educator, if you will, in the YouTube and video space, honestly, I had to learn to decipher and dissect the very hard cinematography, conversation, and language, and like translate all that stuff to make sense. That's why I started doing videos, because I'm like, don't nobody care about all of that when you're trying to just make stuff for your brand or your business or what have you. You're just trying to like understand it enough to do this, set it and forget it, if you will. So when I got to learning about like YouTube and some of the very basics when it came to video actually came from Sean Cannell. of Think Media. So a lot of people may be familiar with that, and we've worked together. Think is like a family. So Sean, Heather, Omar, they're really great people. Nolan, so I know them personally, so they're like family to me. But Sean was like an early mentor or educator to me, not because I knew him personally at the time. I knew him later, but initially was just through consuming his content and taking what he said to heart. So I had a journal of notes by the time my first DSLR camera came in the mail of things to implement, to try and to learn. And then after that would just be like what I call YouTube University, which is I have a question, I put it into YouTube search bar, and my teacher became whoever came up in search that could best answer that question for me.
Wow. So your coach is Sean Cannon. Wow, that's really good. Guys, think about it. I'm hanging out with Diana, and Diana is a friend of Think Media, Sean Cannon. This is so cool. All right, let's see. What's next? So we have, we have a super chat. Thank you, $10 super chat from Tukelele. Thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. We had Devin say even Nikon. I don't know if it was a question. Let me see. Trying to find. Okay, we have a question here.
Okay.
You want to go ahead and read it? Yeah.
Sure, I can go for it. Sean White Jr. saying, I am considering the PTZ cameras for my ministry because of personnel. Anything to be mindful of in that space? So that's a really great question. And for those that don't know what the PTZ cameras are, it's like the pan, tilt, zoom, which is basically if you could imagine a camera with like tracking, or like you could move the knob, kind of like security cameras. You can zoom in on a person, zoom way out, and move it, and it's a really small camera. It's a pretty neat concept. The thing with PTZ cameras is that you're looking at something that is an all-in-one system. If you get like the generic like PTZ cameras, then at that point you can use it with whatever software or things like that that you want to use, Ableton Live, and create systems and things like that around what you're trying to do. At that point, like you do need to be considerate of lighting. Lighting is going to be like something you really need to watch for in that scenario, because when anytime you're dealing with something with a very small sensor, we now need to compensate for not a bunch of light or as much light being able to come to that sensor because it's smaller. We need to compensate for that with good lighting. So if you have like I was in a ministry space where we used the Mevo cameras, and I think those are terrible. It's like just because they it's basically like a GoPro, but it's more or less the software, and it's kind of locked into that Mevo system or whatever. So I was just like, no, this is a great idea, not the best execution at the time. But the PTZ cameras are kind of cool because you can follow pastor and do all the things from one board. What I would recommend though is make sure you have your stage lit from the range of where that person is going to go. You know, pastors like to walk and go go out to at least the first 2 or 3 rows. So you may want to have a conversation of what's the range of that camera from where it's sitting and where it's angled, and have a conversation with the ministry team of, if there is something that you're trying to do, don't go past the third pew because I won't be able to follow you or track you at this angle, or I won't be able to keep up with you past this point. And so we had to do that with our pastor, and he was like, okay, great. So he noticed, he gets to that third row, and then he back off. Or if he needs somebody to come from back there, he would tell them to come up or whatever, because we didn't have somebody on the floor to do all these different things. So that's something to consider. It's going to be lighting, and then the guiding and markings. You can use something like gaffer's tape to mark. Don't go past this point on the stage, pastor, because I won't be able to see you and track and keep up with you. And then just making sure you have adequate lighting. And then obviously testing your systems. Like in a Bible study, have pastor not sit down maybe and have him move around normally like he would for a Sunday service or something like that. And like what's the scope of, like, when they're excited, they're talking, they're teaching, they're moving about, how would they normally move and interact? And what's as close as you need to get before the degradation on the other side is like really deteriorated, right? So we never want to zoom into a point to where they're very pixelated, it's very blurry, and it just doesn't look attractive. So just knowing the range of what to do. So that's what I would say if you're going to use those PTZ cameras.
Awesome. Okay, we got another question here. Let's see. So we've got, what's your setup for live stream like? I'm assuming they're talking about you.
Okay. So I'll go. I guess you most of the time people just mean the camera and the lens and stuff like that. So I'll do that, and then the audio. Um, I use the Sony A6400. I've been using that since 2019 for my streaming camera. That's what you're looking at right now. I use the Sony 35 millimeter f1.8 lens. That's connected all in through a capture card, which is the Elgato Camlink 4K, and I use the Sony AC adapter just to make sure I have unlimited power. My audio setup is using this Shure SM7B, which is this microphone here. I'm using also the Rodecaster Pro, and then to add some amplification to the voice, just because this is a bit of a gain hungry microphone, which means to, I would say, give it life, more life, if you will, increase the volume while limiting the noise, would be the Triton FET head that goes in the back of the Rodecaster Pro. And I use a set of Viltrox LED lights to light my setup with diffusion material, the pop-up softbox by Defuse. That's what I use. So that's basically, in a nutshell, my setup. I keep it very simple. Before that, I was using a USB mic by Samson Q2U.
Awesome. We got another question here. I'm looking at a camcorder for my church production and recommendations.
Yeah, don't go super cheap. So if you're trying to do a camcorder, do not go into like the $300 range of stuff, because honestly, at that point, your smartphone is better. And when I'm saying like a price point, that at that point, the features for what's going to be listed on Amazon or like even like a Craigslist or whatever, Facebook Marketplace even, it's just going to be too cheap. It's going to be like a 1080p and it's going to be terrible. So you can get some camcorders, but it's like when you're looking at that, again, same rules apply. Make sure that the features are up to par with what you actually need. They'll always boast like zoom ranges and stuff like that. But at some point, again, it looks like garbage. It's like you're trying to zoom in from one side of the basketball field to the other. If it's not clear, all that extra range doesn't matter that the motor can do it. The lens may be terrible. So I can't remember the models right now by Sony, and Canon have some. Even Panasonic have some good ones if you have somebody operating it. But I would stick either Canon or Sony even with that, just to make sure you can do it. And it's like, I can't remember the model number of what it is right now, but just make sure that most of the time you're going to find it in like 4K or at least a 1080p, but most of the time it's going to be like 4K these days. Just make sure it has good autofocus. You're usually going to get really good stabilization, and just test the audio preamp so that it's not problematic for you with, adding hiss and stuff like that, or even like syncing issues, but should be fine now with Sony or Canon.
Perfect. Let's take a look at other questions. I think we've seen this. Say, we now use Mevo for our church, very limited. What is a good camera? No PTZ for church service.
It depends on what you're trying to do. If this is a camera that's going to sit on the tripod, which honestly, most churches, like especially like say if you're in that Mevo category, you probably are like fighting to keep people involved in the ministry, showing up consistently and stuff like that in the media team or whatever. So you're trying to do a lot of jobs or wear a lot of hats. Again, very baseline. You're looking at something like an A6400 if it's going to sit on the tripod, because it is going to be great for photos. It would be good for, if you need to do very basic live streaming, but also make sure that that's actually what you need, because you might be better off with a camcorder or whatever, and then doing some stuff on a smartphone that the church owns so that you can do some other things. So it just really depends, honestly. You can look into something even because you're mostly behind the camera at that point. You can find really good budget-friendly camera bodies like the Sony A7 III that will do a good job with a lot of basic functions of, again, live streaming. You would need somebody to man the camera and stuff like that for some of the lens functions and things like that if you're going the mirrorless route. If not, again, that may be taking a camcorder approach. If that non-PTZ, not a Mevo, but something in the in-between, it might be a camcorder for you.
Yeah, I always tell people, if you can afford If you know how to use a mirrorless camera, I always recommend that, especially a lot of churches, I think they struggle with low light because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
churches, it's a style.
Yep.
We all like to dim the lights. So camcorders most of the time are going to suffer because, first of all, you cannot, they're not interchangeable lenses, so you cannot
Mm-hmm.
remove the lens on it. So by having a mirrorless camera, it helps you to actually maybe get a better lens that will actually adapt to low light environment. But
100%.
again, if you don't, yeah, if you don't have volunteers, and you probably one man running everything, that's why you probably need a PTZ. Then if no PTZ, then a camcorder. Then you're gonna have to work on your lighting for sure.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Um, let's see what we have here.
And just real quick, if I can,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
to that point, like a lot of churches do struggle with trying to get somebody to do their social media and stuff. Yet and still, they're in a neighborhood where every kid around the block, from 2 years old to 17, 16 years old or whatever, young adults, want to be a YouTuber. Let them be the YouTuber for the church. If you want somebody that's going to learn the video stuff, be committed. Why wouldn't they? You know what I'm saying? If you invest and ask them to do the research, they can keep up on the latest. They already are. So a lot of times churches are struggling because they're trying to convert the non-willing adult around to try to figure out and keep up with social trends and stuff. Why? When you have literally an entire market of young people around you that would be more than happy to do it every week faithfully. So I just think like if that's a struggle for those that may be listening and you're in that nonprofit or church sector, put a listing out where you speak to the children and the parents together and see about doing some trial runs with them or teaching them or whatever, to where they're guided, obviously get to the point of trust, because we are talking about expensive equipment and stuff, and they would honestly love and be honored to do anything like that. I ran into a situation where I was doing an event and I brought my camera. I was the only person that had a camera. And the young man walked in. It's like all for all young women. I was doing a talk for young women for a ministry organization. And he had to come with his mom. And of course, he came kicking and screaming. And he saw my camera. He was like, a vlogging camera. And I was like, you want to be a videographer for a day? He was, I'd love to. So he went from hating that he had to come to like, he captures the footage for the talk. It took him literally minutes to pick up on those concepts because he already had been watching this stuff himself. And he was like 9 years old and he did a fantastic job. So honestly, that it's not as big of a tough topic. It's just more or less of a trust topic. But I think if churches are struggling with that still, you just aren't embracing into the community. There's kids that want to do this stuff every day of the week.
Awesome tips. We have another question here. I don't know if you can read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. St. John's Church of Uganda asking, does the choice of video switcher affect the video quality, even in situations where you have good cameras? Most video switchers, like if you're looking at like the A10 Mini or A10 Mini Pro, there's a couple of other options that are out there that I've heard of as well. It shouldn't too much, because you're looking at taking a strong connection and basically keeping that a strong connection. And churches usually have, depending on the size and the scope, from where the media team is to like most of the time they're like in the back of the church or off to the side in a booth or something. And then you have like the front stage or the front of the ministry house. Depending on that, you mostly are probably either going to go, you probably won't run HDMI. You're probably going to be doing SDI. At that point, you shouldn't have any problems. So as long as you're not getting something that's like a no-name brand that nobody knows or has had any longevity in knowing that it can run competently and like won't break. So as long as you're not using some no-name, nobody has any experience with company, you should be fine with the A10 minis. I've done events and stuff like that when I would do videography work, and I've not had any issues with that. So as long as you're starting with a strong signal, it will just pass that along.
Yeah, I would say if you're using cheap capture cards, obviously you're gonna have some color
Right.
shift.
Yep.
But if you're using something like the A10 Mini, A10 Mini Pro, you should be okay. If you're using anything SDI, you should be okay. I used to own I mean, this is like old school, but I used to own a TriCaster, which
Tried and
uses
true.
RGB, RGB component. So that's basically analog. So to use
Hmm.
HDMI cameras, I had to convert from HDMI to analog. Then those converters, most of them, they're super cheap, and they are going to actually affect the quality of your video. So as long as Diana just said, if you using something like the A10 Mini Pro from Blackmagic, you should be good. Let's see. Um, see, it's not showing. Okay, here we go. Which software you are currently using for live streaming and highlighting comments? Ah, okay, I think that's me. So I'm using a software. It's not a software. It's an extension called Social Ninja. So I've actually made a video about it. So I'm using Video Ninja to bring in Diana, and I'm using Social Ninja. It's a free extension. I use a lot of free stuff. I'm using OBS as well to bring in comments. So that's what I'm using. If you're interested, let me know. Send me a quick email. I'll be more than happy to actually help you set it up for yourself. Um, let's see. Do you have a list of the budget cameras for video that you mentioned, or do you have a video on your channel about it, Diana?
No, you actually caught me ahead of dropping that video on the channel. We're working on that right now, and then also writing out what we hope to be like an exhaustive explanation of like a lot of options. Because the thing is, again, most people, you don't know what you don't know, and so you assume like, because in real life, 3, 5, 7, $900 is actually a lot of money in the camera space for what you're trying to do. Most of the time, it's not a lot of money to, you know what I'm saying? Like we talked about and mentioned some cameras that are like in the 3,000, 4,000, $5,000 price range. We ain't even talked about lenses that are up there, right? So in the camera space and tech space, for what you're trying to do, sometimes it's like it's $300 or $500. It's not going to get you anything, right? So for budget friendly cameras, it's like I don't have that on the channel yet. We're working on that right now, but that should be coming out very soon. But more or less, I would say when you're trying to look at what you're going to get, you need to make your list. Otherwise, it's a great way to waste money going to YouTube first. And it's kind of counterintuitive because I'm on YouTube. That's my primary platform. But I really want people to be good stewards of what they're investing in and the money that they're investing, because you got to take this money from someplace. Either it's coming from a budget, from the business or the nonprofit, or it's coming from Hip National Bank from you going to work and putting in the work. So it's like, if you're going to invest, put your list of non-negotiables. What are the things that you're trying to do? What do you envision for your content plan? Do you want to live stream? How long? What kinds of videos do you want to create? Usually for most people in that space, is that a 10, a 15-minute video? Is that a 3 or 5 minute video? Great, because that means your raw content, if this is your day one of recording, might be 20 or 25 minutes for you trying to figure out how to make a 5 minute video, just because you're not experienced in doing that. So a camera that has a 30-minute recording limit, and you want to put out a 20-minute, 30-minute training, you got like 60, 70 minutes worth of content that you got to figure out. Again, just not being experienced. So just write down your list of what are the things and the features that you want in a camera, or the things that you want to be able to do. Now let's fit a camera to your needs versus just like the stuff that gets talked about, because sometimes your recommendations, like I almost never recommend a camcorder except in certain situations like tonight, where somebody's like, yeah, we need this kind of a specific use case. Great. Your specific recommendation is this, versus just saying like, oh, get a Canon M50 Mark II. Yeah, no, it's not going to work for you. So that's
Yeah.
what my honest recommendation would be.
Yeah. I think I also tell people to, most of the time, to actually come up with a budget, because at the end of the day, you know how much you can spend on a camera. Then if I know, let's say you want to spend no more than $800, I could probably find you a cheap used mirrorless camera for $500, and a cheap used lens for $200, something like that. And that's probably gonna work for you for few years before you add a second camera or a third camera. So it really depends on what you want and what you need as far as features are concerned. But also, I'm thinking maybe what he was, maybe he's looking for some sort of guide. Maybe, yeah, I'm thinking of actually coming up with something like that. Maybe some sort of guide for under $1,000 cameras, Sony cameras or Panasonic, and what's good, what's bad, what do you expect from those type of cameras and stuff like that. Again, I would say maybe personally you can go ahead, actually reach out to me, send me a quick email, and if you need help, I'll be more than happy to actually assist you with that.
For sure. Nice.
Let's see. It looks like the chat is kind of quiet now. We don't have any more questions. Guys, we are about to close. Diana, do you have any last words, something you would like to say before we close the stream? Just before you talk, I just want to let the people know that they can actually check you out. The channel link, your channel link is in the description and in the chat. So guys, make sure you check her out. She's an amazing content creator. So let's go ahead and actually, yeah, do you have any last words, something you would like to say?
Yeah. So for the person that's getting into video, I don't think things happen by accident. And when you're getting into video, I highly encourage you to let go of limiting beliefs and limitations in your thinking when you come into this video space, because when you start taking and mobilizing your vision using video, you now become a global entity, a global organization. Your message truly becomes global with a free Gmail account and, putting your content on a platform like YouTube. And so if you're going to start investing in gear and equipment, make sure you're investing in something that is going to meet the expectations and the requirements of your vision currently, but also has the capacity and the bandwidth to, like, honestly receive the blessings of ideas that I believe come from God, so that when it's time to execute, you can just execute, right? So that's what I would encourage people to do, because you never want to get to a point to where you're sitting on an idea, and it could be the idea that makes the difference from you getting out of your current situation to the life that you envision in your mind. So just make sure, if you're going to invest wisely.
Awesome. Before we go, I think we had we have a question here. I don't know if you mind. Do you mind spending extra
No, we
5
can go.
minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So we have a question here. What's your top camera recommendation under $1,000? I think we just talked about that, but
so if you're looking for, like, specifically under 1,000, to be honest, you have a lot of wiggle room under $1,000. I would honestly say take a look at not just new cameras, but look in the used market, because you may be able to find some really good cameras that are in the used that otherwise would be in that $2,000 category. I would say, honestly, this time next year, even, you can probably find some A7 IVs somewhere within $1,000, a little bit over $1,000 price range. But right now, if you're just getting started, to be honest, if you can find it, the Sony ZV-E10 camera that I talked about, this camera has a lot of great features, a lot of great things in it that you can use for video. Stellar autofocus, 4K 30 frames per second, 1080p 120 frames per second, and on and on kind of a stuff. An A6400 and not A6400, A6600 is really, really good. So one of those two.
Yeah, so basically A6400, A6600, Sony ZV-E10. I think there was another one.
I mentioned earlier, like, the A6100, if they're looking to get, but more or less, to be honest, the ZV-E10 kind of replaces that. And I did do a video comparing, like, the 61, 6400, and 6600 cameras for the Sony. Like, if they wanted to do it, the ZV-E10 wasn't out then. So if they want to see that comparison and just, like, what's the difference, in those price tiers of those cameras, then that's available on the channel. But yeah, ZVE10, A60 400 or A60 600. I would say more so if you can find it, ZVE10, honestly.
Yeah, also guys, just want to mention that today we're talking about specifically Sony cameras. So you don't have to get Sony cameras only. You can also go for
Right.
Panasonic, Canon, right? You just need, like I always tell people, invest in your skills, know what you trying to get, right? It's not about
So
just
good.
grabbing a camera because Diana said so or Sam said so, right? It's about knowing what you need. You probably don't need autofocus. It's just an example. If you don't need autofocus, micro four third may be a good choice for you. But if you need that creamy, nice looking, and depth of field with a good autofocus, probably Sony and Canon are going to be your best friends. So it's really about knowing, invest in your skills, watch some YouTube videos, watch me, watch Diana, watch other cool creators talking about cameras on YouTube, and actually assess your situation, know exactly what you're trying to get. I'm sure you're gonna find something that will match your situation, and that you won't have to spend more than $1,000. Okay, so okay guys, I'm out in like 5 minutes.
The
I'm
questions
trying
keep
to
coming.
close it. Exactly. Can you connect any of the cameras you mentioned to an audio mixer?
Yes.
Let's-
Yeah, you can, and I have. And so you can connect it directly if you want, or if you're trying to run that through a more complicated audio system and stuff like that, you can. I don't tend to recommend it simply because you want to keep your camera and audio source separate, just because you most of the time need to, whether it's like in person or whatever, unless you're just recording and like taking like a wireless or handheld into the camera for that specific reason, then fine. But if you're doing like production, like again, it could be live stream or whatever, you want to have your separate audio and then your separate video feeds going in differently. But you can, and I have done that, and it's worked well. So all of them can do that because they all have a microphone input port.
Yeah, you can actually do it. Although I do not recommend it mostly for like bigger productions. If it's
Hmm.
something like a small production, a small church, or something like YouTube or social media, then it's 100% possible.
Hmm.
All right, so it looks like we have no more questions. Guys, I do thank you so much for joining today. So many of you guys. I see Victor, I see St. John's Church, I see Devin, Champ Media UK. Thank you so much for being here. I see Tukele, sorry, I'm messing up your names. I see Isaac, I see Sean, I see Dennis, I see Cricket. Sorry, maybe that's not your name. My man Russell. Thank you guys for watching today. Thank you for joining the stream. I do appreciate you. Hopefully I'm gonna come back next week with another guest. Please make sure, let me know if you know someone that you would love to have them on the show. Let me know, put in the comments, and let me know who you would like to have in the chat. But other than that, I want to thank Diana for being here. Thank you so much. Again, I want to say it again. I'm a big fan of your work. You're doing an amazing job on YouTube, and it's an honor to have you today on my YouTube channel, on my show. I appreciate you. Looks like you have said your last words. I would love to keep you longer, maybe for
Thank
another hour.
Thank you. It's funny because I saw like the comments and they kept popping up, and it's like at churches it's like, okay, the pastor said he was gonna close, another 5 minutes, another 5 minutes. But it's been an honor and a pleasure to be here. So thanks so much for having me on your show.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll see you hopefully on one of my videos or another live stream. Thank you, guys. Take care.